Chapter 231, Ultimate Class 3, Assemble. The game of hide-and-seek between young Masters Elite and Waterflower had proceeded quite slowly, so by the time they got out, the other semi-final matches had already ended. The system-ranked number 1 mercenary group in Yunjuan City, the Black Hand, safely made it to the finals. With Yunjuan City's number 1 mercenary group, called the Black Hand, pitched against the publicly acknowledged Dark Horse mercenary group, Young Masters Elite, the finals outcome was shrouded in darkness. While the Black Hand might be regarded as the top group in Yunjuan City, it was a group that mostly accomplished the system-given missions and was unlike the other mercenary groups, such as 4Cs, that were made up of skilled players from big guilds. Now that Young Masters Elite was about to face such a foe, Brother Assist realized how sparse his information about the Black Hand was and hurriedly called his friends and went to the forums to find out more about the opposing group. Information collection was the one time that Brother Assist felt a sense of belongingness into Young Masters Elite. No one really cared about the guild versus guild tournament that would occur after. With how guilds would acquire more members every time they leveled up, only the guilds of Traversing 4Cs and Carouse were at level 5 in Yunjuan City. Since Carouse was beaten by Amethyst Rebirth long ago, Traversing 4Cs was the only guild with 750 members in the guild versus guild tournament. This disparity of 250 men allowed Traversing 4Cs to easily win the matches against the remaining level 4 guilds with 500 members. It was at this point that the system announced, all the eliminated guilds and mercenary groups in the semi-finals will have a match on the last day of Parallel Worlds event to determine the third place in the guild versus guild tournament and the mercenary PvP tournament. Guilds and mercenary groups that were in first place, second place, and third place would be given additional special prizes accordingly, the very same prizes that had a chance to occur during the PvP tournament. As for what the prizes would be, those would still up to chance. Furthermore, the tournament finals were not scheduled for tomorrow and were instead set 3 days later, which happened to be a Saturday. This was one of those rare times that the game officials showed slight compassion for the players. No one would naturally be willing to miss the opportunity to participate in Parallel Worlds event if he or she could help it, considering that this PvP event had prizes at the end, so the game officials would essentially be making things difficult for the players who had work the next day if they placed it on a weeknight. All the guilds and mercenary groups in Parallel World were currently anxiously preparing for the final matches. None of them wished to miss the chance of bagging the special prizes. Meanwhile, the 6 men of Young Masters Elite went about their usual activities. This seemingly carefree attitude of theirs was not because of arrogance or undervaluing the prizes, but it was due to the fact that there were only 6 of them in the group. Compared to a guild like Traversing 4Cs with 750 men, it was as easy as eating a meal or drinking water for a group with 6 men to coordinate with one another. Today was Thursday. Gufei felt quite dispirited when he got online and made his way over to Yunjuan City's North Gate. Why was he feeling dispirited? During today's afternoon PE lesson, Gufei felt a weird vibe from a certain class of students as he stood in front of them. Simply put, they were giving off strong killing intent. As such, the period ended in an odd note. But before Gufei could dismiss the students, over 20 boys and girls suddenly surrounded him and started to speak all at once. "Sir, join our guild. Sir, bring us to grind levels. Sir, carry us for quests. Sir, I'm very poor. Give me some money. Sir, do you have any equipment you're not using?" Gufei felt his head throb with all their shouting. The curiosity of other unrelated students was piqued when they saw teacher Gufei being surrounded by some of them, so they inquired after the matter. Soon after, they began whispering by the side, "Even teacher is playing Parallel World? Maybe I should give it a try." Gufei swept his gaze over. Plenty of students here viewed the teacher's words as holy scriptures and would follow their examples to the fullest extent. They were definitely the sort that teachers would usually regard as good students. Right now, he could tell that all these students were about to join Parallel World. If their parents asked, they would probably proudly tell that they were playing the game with teacher Gufei. How was he going to live that down? Gufei was not afraid of fights, but facing this sort of troublesome matter, which could not be resolved through fighting, he could not help but wish that he could cast Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno in reality. "Alright, stop. Gufei did not forget his position as a teacher despite all the chattering about the game. This was the real world, after all. When a teacher got mad, no student would dare make a peep. Gufei at least had this effect over this lot of students. Don't you have homework at night? What, play a game? Gufei reprimanded them. Although it felt odd to hear such a thing from a PE teacher, the students reflexively lowered their heads in shame. Run 10 laps on the field. Now that he sounded more like a PE teacher, half of the students balked. The school field's circumference was about 400 meters, so 10 laps would equate to running for 4 kilometers. That was 4 times the distance a high school student would have to run in a track and field event. The usual track and field event for a school's sports meet was about 3 kilometers, and that was only for students who were very confident of their perseverance and stamina. 4 kilometers. Some of the present girls were already shedding tears. Sir, please tell us you're joking. Someone moaned. Of course, Gufei was just pulling their legs. The students still had class after this, and it was already late for them to run for about 4 kilometers. Just do 2 laps. Head back to class once you're done. The students started running around the field with tears streaming down their cheeks. Gufei stood by the side of the track and looked on, not once urging them to speed up. All the members of the Ultimate Class 3 Guild in Yunjuan City were currently running together on the track. Was there a need to explain how this guild came to have such a strong sense of camaraderie and solidarity if one considered what they had to go through together daily? The students did not need to run too fast since this was not a test. Yet no one dared to slow down to trot under Gufei's watchful gaze. Just jogging for 800 meters was enough to make these students feel worn out. This was especially true for the girls who begged the boys to do an extra lap on their behalf. Those nosy students had already left, and only the members of Ultimate Class 3 remained standing before Gufei. Gufei felt slightly moved when he saw the determination in their eyes, so he dismissively told them, "Wait for me by the city gate tonight." His sudden change of heart surprised these students for a bit before they began cheering. Gufei's IGN was something that many leaders in Yunjuan City had strove to uncover, yet these students had easily found it out due to Alpha coming up with it in the first place. After learning of Gufei's IGN from Alpha, all of them hurriedly checked the Mage leaderboard and found out that Gufei was at level 40. Level 40 was a level that these students viewed as extremely high. Be it for entertainment or value purposes, these students resolved to recruit their PE teacher into Ultimate Class 3 Guild. Now that their goal was half achieved, everyone naturally felt elated beyond words. Seeing that Gufei was about to leave, Alpha, who had been playing the game for long, hurriedly stopped Gufei from leaving as he asked a relevant question. "Sir, which gate is that? You really have a lot to say." "Go run another lap," Gufei said instead. Alpha was the antithesis of an athlete. Just those 2 rounds from before had left him exhausted, so he knew that running this additional lap would be the death of him. Still, his question reminded all these students of that fact and they very quickly surrounded Gufei to inquire about the specific location, so he had no choice but to arrange to meet them by the north gate. Gufei no longer had a way to escape from them after setting the time and location with his students. Everyone would see one another in reality if they did not meet in game, so the adage, "A monk runs away from his responsibilities, yet the temple cannot run with him" superscript 1 apostrophe was extremely applicable to him at the moment. Gufei was holding in such anger right now. He did not stand them up, yet it was his students that were a no-show. Gufei would be cursing and forcing them to call him their father squared if they were just any random group of players. Unfortunately, he had his dignity as a teacher to consider since he was facing his students. The point was that he had to exchange it with something else. That was how Gufei had stopped himself. If he called himself as their father, it would be very shocking for these students. And yet, it would be a huge problem if they treated him even more casually. Playing a game with his students? It was such a big no-no. It was already the agreed upon time, yet the students were nowhere to be seen. Gufei patiently waited until each of the students finally came running from the various spawn points. The reasons they gave were all over the place, as well. "My mother asked me to do the dishes. My father was playing Minesweeper, so I had to wait a little longer." Gufei was in tears, as the students' explanations were so relatable. He thought back to when he had told Sword Demon and the lot that he would log off due to him having classes, and they had regarded him with a strange look on their faces. Each of the students added Gufei as a friend when they arrived. This was yet another opportunity that all the leaders in Yunjuan City had missed. That day, from 7 p.m. to 7:17 p.m., Gufei patiently accepted all their friend requests. Ahem, line up. Gufei ordered once all the students showed up. Sadly, there was no such item like a whistle in this game. Conducting everyone by merely pointing was just too frivolous for a teacher like himself. Come on, teacher, let's not do that. It's so embarrassing. All the students objected. Was it more embarrassing than being called teacher in the game? Gufei was almost in tears, yet he simply could not come up with any way to circumvent this. It was either his real name or his IGN, and either option would simply be too disrespectful. Calling him drunk bro like what Fireball and others had done was even more awkward than these students calling him teacher. Since Gufei was going to feel embarrassed by all this, he might as well make everyone feel the same, so he insisted for the students to line themselves up. All the students were hesitant, so Gufei looked at them solemnly. Those who do not line themselves up will have to run 8 laps during our next lesson. All the students hastily lined themselves up. Gufei nodded his head in satisfaction. There were 24 students present, so that made it 4 lines of 6. Is our sports representative here? Gufei scanned the crowd, seeing quite a few students he had not noticed before. Nope, sir. Our number is just right. We originally only had 21, but 3 others joined us after this afternoon lesson. With them included, we now have 24. If we add one more, we will then have 5 rows. 21 will have 3. What do you mean that 24 is perfect? Alpha, you idiot. Some students rebutted. Alpha was aggrieved. How would he know that they had to stand in line like this in a game? When he said that their number was just right, he was not talking about lining up. Meanwhile, Gufei was vexed to learn that he had attracted 3 more students this afternoon. How would he deal with this if this continued? Chapter 232, Ultimate Class 3, set off. Plenty of people were coming and going under the arch of the city's north gate around this time, and the scene of a group of players lining up in 4 neat rows attracted the attention of many of these passers-by. Gufei might be standing before them looking all dignified, yet with how he was regarding this group of students, it was apparent that he was trying his best to appear as if he did not know any of them. Just what is going on here? Some of the nearby players whispered to one another. I don't know. Oh, I know. It's the army. The country finally sent an army into this game. China is beginning to attach importance to MMOs. Someone said excitedly. Go to hell. You've read too many Yi novels. They are just a bunch of kids, maybe. They are all Boy Scouts? As the onlookers continued to discuss this matter, Gufei decided to make this even more awkward and embarrassing for the students. He looked at the team before him and said, anyone in the class committee? A class monitor? A warrior from one of the neat rows raised his hand and shouted, Sir, what's the matter? Since the sports representative isn't here, you will stand in for now. Come out and take lead, we're setting off. Gufei replied. Wow, teacher is pretty crafty for delegating such an embarrassing thing to me. The class monitor was about to faint. Doing this sort of thing in reality was naturally, yet doing it in a game was extremely embarrassing. Hurry up, don't dawdle. Are you having fun making a spectacle in front of everyone? Gufei urged. This situation nationally embarrassed all the present students to the point of wanting to dig a hole for them to hide in. Now that they were given a way to escape the curious onlookers, they hatefully glared at their class monitor for hesitating and told him, get it over with. The class monitor could feel tears streaming down his cheeks as he said aloud, turn to your left and jog. All the students synchronized their steps and jogged out of Yunjuan's north gate amid the crowd's sighs of awe upon witnessing the scene. Stay in neat formation when you're jogging. Why aren't you shouting your slogan? Gufei pointed out from behind. Spare us, sir. All the students cried out. The slogan that Gufei was referring to was of course the 1, 2, 3, 4 cry that they would shout whenever they jogged in an orderly fashion like this. It seemed that they no longer had any way of getting out of this without drawing the attention of everyone around them. Shouting that line was truly embarrassing and attention-grabbing, so everyone began to think to themselves, was approaching teacher in the game a mistake? Fine, just a simple chant and cadence will do. All your steps are in a mess. Class monitor. Gufei shouted. 1, 2, 1, 2. The class monitor helplessly called out as he became filled with misery internally. It seemed that being a class monitor was a mistake, as well. Heading out from one of the city gates, the students met players along the way no matter which direction they chose to jog. The actions of the students were rigid, and they jogged in sync with one another, yet their heads hunkered lower and lower the more they ran, looking like a troop of headless corpses moving together from afar. This continued on for an undetermined amount of time until they found themselves in a somewhat desolate and sparsely populated area. Some of the students felt baffled as it had been a long time since they heard anything from their teacher. They turned their heads backward and saw that Gufei was about 200 meters away from them, leisurely pacing behind them as they jogged in the wilderness outside of Yunjuan City. All the students stopped jogging and waited for their teacher to catch up. "Why are you stopping? You all can't just stop unless I tell you to do so. Continue." There were no outsiders around them now, so Gufei immediately took charge of commanding them. The students continued onward as Gufei monitored their pace just like in the class, waiting for them to coordinate their movements perfectly before calling them to stand at attention. "Are we there yet?" Gufei asked. "What does teacher mean by there?" the students asked, baffled. "If we're not there yet, why are you all stopping?" Gufei asked. The students looked at one another. "Where are we going? How will I know where you all are going?" Gufei retorted. All the students suddenly felt lightness overcome them. They had done all this for nothing. Gufei had already found himself a scapegoat for this. "Class monitor, where are you bringing the class to?" The class monitor was already in tears, swearing to himself that he would drag the sports representative into the game once he returned to reality. In the meantime, he could only say, "I don't know. I've been leading them out here blindly. I'm not even familiar with this map." "Oh, that's right. We should let Alpha take the lead. He has been playing the game for the longest, so he should be the most familiar with Yunjuan City's terrain." The class monitor had a eureka moment when he realized he needed not to drag the sports representative in the game when they had a savior right here. Alpha was speechless. No one usually paid attention to him, yet they always called for him whenever they were in trouble. He was pretty much the most reluctant guild leader in all of Yunjuan City. Gufei did not dwell on this problem for long and just continued to ask, "Then, what did you look for me today for?" "Sir, join our guild." "Sir, bring us to grind levels." "Sir, carry us for quests." "Sir, I'm very poor. Give me some money." "Sir, do you have any equipment you're not using?" It was the exactly same questions that they had mentioned this afternoon. "All right, calm down." Gufei shouted to get everyone to stop, saying, "Guild teacher is already in one. Grinding? Teacher usually grinds alone. Quests? There are many of you here, so there's no way I can carry you all." "Money? Teacher still owes someone 1800 gold coins. As for equipment, I have some, so I'll give them to you guys once we head back." "Yay!" The students cheered. They felt very happy at having achieved one out of their 5 terms, and it was the most important term, too. "Now disperse. Do whatever you want. Meet at the north gate when it's 9 p.m. Gufei waved his hands to dismiss them. "Ah, wait. Don't go off just yet." Alpha hurriedly leapt out from the group. As everyone stared at him, he explained, "I have a quest." "Oh, Alpha can stay. The rest of you may leave." Gufei changed his order. "No, don't. It's a guild quest," Alpha hurriedly added. "Guild quest." Gufei wrinkled his brows. He had experienced a guild quest before, and it was when he had teamed up with June's Rain. What ensued was an absolutely vexing matter that turned him from being the hunter to becoming the hunted, from him against a city of players to him being part of a city-wide battle. He recalled it. That was perhaps the only time he had experienced the most bloodshed and slaughter. As Gufei recalled all this, Alpha briefed everyone about the guild quest. Gufei listened and got the gist of it. It seemed that the quest was about vanquishing a band of brigands. Besides requiring them to kill 100 enemies, they apparently had to capture the leader alive as well. Besides Alpha, the other members of Ultimate Class 3 Guild only started playing Parallel World after its official release. Since they barely had time to play the game, being middle school students and all, their levels were pitifully low as well. Naturally, the leader of this band of brigands was a boss. Given how poorly equipped their guild was, Alpha knew that challenging the boss was nearly impossible for them. With the help of a level 40 mage like Gufei, they might achieve a satisfactory outcome in this guild quest. "Oh, boss?" Gufei perked up when he heard this. To him, fighting with players was as difficult as taking on the average monsters. Perhaps, a boss in the game would be a better match for him. Gufei recalled his fight with the mountain bandit leader Sato. Although his method of attack was systematic, Gufei at least had to be more cautious and alert when facing him. That was a level of tension he did not often feel. "Where is he?" "Take me there." "This way." Alpha prepared to lead the way. "Gather up, everyone. Alpha is leading the way," Gufei shouted. Not many people were out here, so the students did not feel uncomfortable to line up once more. They hurriedly returned into their respective rows as Alpha led everyone onward with renewed spirit, immensely enjoying the whole process. Why would he not be when he had such a prominent role before everyone? The group made its way to a certain valley. This area was part of Yangtze Valley, yet it was not frequented by people to grind levels. Some players were around, so the Ultimate Class 3's uniformed arrival attracted these people's attention and they all stopped what they were doing to watch the strange procession. The students were focused on their guild quest, so they currently did not care about the strangers' attention. They could already see their quest target in sight when they entered the valley in neat rows. The guild quest had two parts. First was to kill 100 brigands and second was to capture the leader alive. "Sir, we'll leave the boss to you." The students expected a lot from Gufei. This was normal in MMOs. Players usually admired those with higher level than themselves until they reached that same level and no longer held the level in high regard. Right now, these students were looking up to their teacher who had a higher level than themselves. "Sir, you can also help us with the brigands, but please don't kill them, or else, the result won't be counted in our quest progress." Gufei was not a member of Ultimate Class 3, so he did not have the guild quest in his quest log. Any target he killed would only provide him experience and would of course not be included in the kill count of Ultimate Class 3's guild quest. "Sir, please cast Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno. Let us see it in action." Alpha was looking forward to this spell as he was currently only at level 34. He needed to reach level 36 before he could learn that spell. "Lure the monsters first." Gufei did not mind displaying his prowess before these students. Of course, he did not use his Moonlit Nightfalls as this group had requested him to not kill the monsters. Although these students were young and had low levels, their gaming skills were at least way better than most of the Amethyst Rebirth ladies. While quite a number of them were girls, their coordination was better in almost every aspect than the Amethyst Rebirth ladies after spending many long hours in school and in the game with one another. Gufei had also been spending considerable time every day in the company of top-tier experts inside Parallel World, so his discerning eyes had improved greatly. He could tell that he would have an easier time carrying his students than the Amethyst Rebirth ladies. Two students that were archers ran out to pull the monsters over as the rest glanced over at Gufei. Gufei calmly pointed his finger forward and chanted, "Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno. Arise." "Ah, sir. Why are you using it on us?" The two students in charge of luring the monsters were momentarily stunned and they started to run left and right in panic. "Hey, don't run off like that." Gufei fumed. Each of them ran left and right respectively, pulling the monsters to two separate directions. Gufei had to preemptively cast his spell due to the slow casting time he had. Had the two students continued forward, those monsters would have stepped perfectly into the Blazing Tree of 1,000 Infernos AO. Instead, what resulted from this pull was a mess. The students heard Gufei finish his incantation, yet did not see the spell spring forth, which caused them to feel boundlessly disappointed. By the time the two pulled the monsters to the left and right, the raging Inferno's explosion had just sounded. Naturally, not one brigand was burned off by it. The students were no experts, so they failed to notice the finer details in this scene. They only thought that Gufei's spell was cast off target, immediately causing them to chatter about. "Alpha, is teacher even good?" Someone softly asked Alpha. Alpha was after all the most knowledgeable person among them all. He's okay, I guess." Alpha was also uncertain himself. Chapter 233, The perfect match. That awesome image the students had of Gufei in their minds wavered slightly due to what they deemed as him casting off target. Gufei nationally did not know of their thoughts and merely pointed to Afa, the blazing tree of 1,000 inferno spell that had not managed to burn off even one monster. See that? When Afa nodded his head, Gufei waved his hand toward all the students. Go and fight the monsters. This was how the Operation Exterminate the Brigands officially began. Gufei did not idle. Confident that his spell damage could not insta-kill any of the monsters without his sword, he would occasionally cast a few spells to help everyone. It was fine if he did not provide them assistance, but everyone's heart chilled further when he did. Some of the slightly knowledgeable students toward gaming saw that the monsters Gufei had struck were unfazed by his spells and thoroughly assumed that Gufei's spell damage was average. Since Afa had the greatest gaming knowledge among the students, he could see this most clearly. As a fellow mage, he even estimated that teacher Gufei's spell damage was lower than his. It was not just that, though. Gufei would retreat to the side, fished out fruit from his dimensional pocket, and munched on it every few spells he cast. His smooth actions signified that this was something he was very used to doing. A mage's mana would only deplete this quickly if it was low to begin with. Only one reason could cause this, and that was not adding points to intelligence. A mage that had low intelligence was no better than trash. There was no need to argue over this fact. No matter what type of character a mage was currently building, it was impossible for him or her to disregard intelligence. Afa continued to fight a few brigands as he moved toward Gufei, who was currently eating an apple, feebly asking, "Sir, how did you allocate your stat points?" "I've put them all into agility," Gufei answered. Afa nearly coughed up blood when he heard this. The word trash was on the tip of his tongue and he forcefully swallowed it down. Pausing for a bit, he stiltedly asked, "Why? What do you mean why? Why are you putting all your points to agility?" "To increase my speed," Gufei answered. Speed. Afa muttered to himself. He could not think of a reason for a mage to value speed to the point of foregoing intelligence. Just as he was about to ask for more details, Gufei suddenly cried out, "Behind you!" He then tossed his half-eaten apple over to a student. A student somehow lost track of the brigand he was fighting and stood there in a daze, not knowing that the brigand had already gotten behind him. The half-eaten apple Gufei had thrown struck the said student's head and cleared his muddle-headedness. At the same time, the student registered Gufei's warning and quickly turned around with the weapon in his hand held horizontally, blocking the incoming attack of the brigand. The other students surround him rushed to give him a hand and they very quickly dispatched the brigand. Gufei nodded his head approvingly when he saw the students helping one another. At the same time, he told Afa, who was beside him, "Go and help them fight the monsters. You're the strongest among them, so why are you just standing here?" Afa kept the question he had and joined the skirmish once more. The operation progressed smoothly with everyone's united effort. All counted the monsters they still needed to kill to fulfill the quest requirement. 2 more left. Only 1 more now. Afa inhaled a sharp breath. The brigand leader had yet to reveal itself. Perhaps, the second part of the quest would only be triggered after they killed all the 100 brigands for this first part. Thinking that they would have to depend on Gufei now, Afa's heart beat with trepidation. He sneaked a glance at Gufei as another spell was unleashed. 100. Everyone cheered. Gufei, who had not provided much help throughout this process, became highly vigilant at this moment. He came to the same conclusion as Afa, that the brigand leader would only appear after the first part of the quest was completed. Once the 100th brigand fell down, he did not remain motionless like the others. Instead, this brigand reached into his waist and threw something in the air. A piercing sound was heard as the thrown object soared through the clouds. Only then did the brigand fall to the ground and die. All the students looked at the direction that the flare had disappeared to with restlessness hearts. No matter how strong the brigand leader was, there was no way for him to fall from the sky, so Gufei focused his eyes on the deeper part of the valley. Instead, in no time at all, they heard the heavy sound of footsteps coming from within the valley. The students were quite shaken when they heard this thudding sound. No matter how they put it, this was not the sound anyone would expect from just one person. Melee job classes, quickly move to the front. Priests, head to the back. Archers and mages, get to either side. Afa commanded his fellow classmates to face the enemies in his panic. Gufei, At this point, imposingly stepped forward and told the students, "All of you, retreat to the side." Uh? The students exchanged baffled looks. Goofy already had his back to them as he stuck his hand inside his dimensional pocket. He intended to face these marching enemies alone. "Sir." Alpha quickly ran to him, "There seems to be many enemies." "Yup, that's why you guys should retreat to the side," Goofy said. The 100 brigands before did not actually appear before the students all at once. In actuality, every wave was only consisted of 10 brigands. So the members of Ultimate Class 3 were able to slowly accumulate the kill count of 100. The sound traveling from the valley right now seemed to be made of over 100 brigands charging toward them together. If this final wave truly had these many brigands, Ultimate Class 3 would have no way of successfully completing the guild quest. Alpha was being far too optimistic for hoping that they would not face many enemies all at once. The closer the sound was, the clearer it became. It seemed that the sound of heavy footfalls was not being falsely echoed by the valley's walls, and what they were hearing was truly the sound of actual footsteps. When the figures from deep within the valley became distinguishable, Alpha's face grew deathly pale. Extending his hand out, he frantically ordered, "Run! Everyone, quickly run!" Alpha was a leader that was used to being ordered by everyone, yet at times like this, he was still the person in charge of the guild and was the most knowledgeable when it came to gaming among them, so none of his classmates questioned his judgment and immediately tried to escape from the valley. The students ran for quite a distance before remembering something. They looked backward and saw that Goofy had not moved from his original position. "Sir!" All the students anxiously called out to Goofy. Goofy's full focus was already on the mob of brigands that were rushing toward them. Encountering such a large pack of monsters to grind on was rare for players. Even if they intentionally lured the monsters together, the density of the monsters before Goofy would still far exceed those. In fact, no one would attempt to lure these many monsters all at once. Goofy had instinctively felt that he might have to kill such a huge pack of monsters for this stage of the quest, so he was beside himself with joy. He had actually heard Alpha's call to flee, but he had never once considered that option. Goofy glanced at the students who were currently calling for him and nodded his head in satisfaction when he saw that all of them were standing 20 meters away from him. "Yup, that's far enough. Stay there." "No way?" The students looked at one another in disbelief. They could tell that Goofy did not intend to retreat and seemed to be even looking forward to taking on the huge mob of brigands. At this time, Goofy pulled out his moonlit knife walls. Alpha's eyes shone brightly as he could tell from the sword's aura that Goofy was holding onto top-grade equipment. Teacher wasn't using that weapon before. Alpha was finally realizing that Goofy must not have used the sword earlier to avoid killing off the monsters. Could it be that Teacher's spell damage is actually high enough to insta-kill these brigands? Alpha's mouth was agape from thinking of this possibility, not knowing that he had made the right conjecture. The other students did not know what they should be doing right now, so they could only wait for Alpha, the most experienced gamer among them, to make a decision. "Let's wait and see how this goes." Seeing Goofy's confident look, Alpha wondered if his teacher truly possessed the ability to insta-kill these brigands. If he did, then killing these large mobs would not just be a dream. Holding his moonlit nightfalls with a reverse grip, the students saw Goofy take the initiative to meet the brigands. Alpha grew anxious when he saw that Goofy had not cast a AO spell and had merely sprinted toward the mob of brigands, eventually plunging himself right into their midst. "Teacher, did he want to commit suicide?" the students asked, baffled. It was at this point that battle cries rang through the air. The brigands were full of vigor, but more importantly, Parallel World's full immersion system had not coded them to shout until their throats were sore. Still, merely having these brigands fight the players was boring, so the game designers had each of them howl every time they went to battle to add flavor to the monotonous atmosphere, pleasantly terming this a sound effect. Goofy swung his sword forward with twin incineration, insta-killing 4 brigands. His main intention for doing this was to draw the brigands aggro, so that they would ignore the students behind him and focus solely on him. His plan worked. Mage's spells had higher aggro compared to other job classes' attacks, so Goofy's one swipe caused the entire mob of brigands to surround him. Goofy had not felt flustered since he had already fought the brigands in Yangtze Valley many times in the past. He was very familiar with their attack patterns, and the system had yet to change those even now. Therefore, Unless he made a mistake or lose his concentration during the fight, the brigands right now would be unable to injure Gu Fei. Gu Fei did not wish to fight with this bunch of robots for long, so he extended his sword and pointed toward his feet, blazing 3 of 1,000 Inferno. Arise! It would take some time before his spell would fully materialize, and the good thing about the system's dumb monsters was that they would never try to avoid Gu Fei's spell despite hearing the incantation and would still single-mindedly throw themselves at Gu Fei. The brigands tightly surrounded him without a gap. Gu Fei's left hand lifted Moonlit Nightfalls, while his right hand pulled out the Chinese broadsword, defending against the brigands' attacks as he counted down the seconds in his head. It's about time, Gu Fei said to himself, randomly pointing to somewhere outside the encirclement. He said, translocation, blank. The students all thought that Gu Fei had lost his life when they saw him get surrounded by the throng of brigands. Alpha lost all hopes of Gu Fei being able to extricate himself and was about to call everyone to leave when the air before his eyes distorted and Gu Fei's figure appeared outside the mob's encirclement. At the same time, blazing 3 of 1,000 Inferno flared to life at the heart of the throng of brigands and set them ablaze. The throng of brigands that the system had spawned for this quest was still stuck in that tight encirclement Gu Fei had found himself before. They moved and struggled to orientate themselves to where Gu Fei had appeared, their movements perfectly matching the dancing flames of blazing 3 of 1,000 Inferno. Flames crackled on amid the deaths of all the brigands. Gu Fei returned the weapons inside his dimensional pocket and walked toward the students while casually dusting his hands off together. Alright, that's it for today. Lessons over. Chapter 234. Faking the surrender. The students were deeply shaken by what they had just witnessed and were speechless for the longest time. The fire was still burning brightly behind him when Gu Fei yelled out, "Everyone, gather! It's time to return to the city." The students ran toward Gu Fei and lined themselves up. Those who had a better understanding of the game, including Afa, were even more baffled by Gu Fei's recent display of power. Under the others' exclamations of awe for Gu Fei, Afa reminded his teacher, "Sir, the mission requires for us to capture the brigand leader alive." "Capture alive? How do we do that?" Gu Fei was slightly taken aback. He suddenly saw the students' faces looking horrified as one of them hurriedly screamed, "Sir, watch out!" His warning came a little too late, though, as this boss, just like any other bosses in MMOs, possessed extraordinarily fast speed than the average monsters. While Gu Fei's blazing 3 of 1,000 Inferno insta-killed all of the normal brigands, the brigand leader managed to survive his attack. The brigand leader sprinted out of the raging Inferno and charged toward Gu Fei, who was busy organizing his students. Gu Fei was holding the monster's aggro, so the brigand leader aimed its saber toward him and struck. The way the NPCs and monsters in Parallel World were programmed might be drab and rigid, but none of them would emit killing intent. Killing intent was something that the game was able to replicate due to its system being able to fully simulate the complexities of the human body. NPCs and monsters were entirely made up of data and numbers, so something like killing intent nationally did not exist in their formatting. The sound of burning flames behind Gu Fei perfectly masked the footfalls of the brigand leader. By the time the students managed to alert Gu Fei of the incoming attack, the brigand leader's saber had already connected to Gu Fei's waist and had sent him flying outward. "Sir!" the students exclaimed. Of course, they had priests among them, and many of them scrambled to bestow heal on Gu Fei. No matter how powerful the boss was, its basic attack could not insta-kill a player. Under the students' quick administration of heal, Gu Fei was able to recover from his critical condition and get himself back to his feet. "Quickly dodge!" Alpha shouted. "Dodge what?" Gu Fei used the side of the cliff to support himself, his face wearing a calm expression as he held Moonlit Nightfalls aloft. Heal and other non-offensive skills could still attract the monster's aggro based on their properties. In fact, casting this sort of skills would garner the monster's aggro across a wide area, so in any normal situation, the priest's constant usage of heal would lure nearby monsters toward them. As for this brigand leader's aggro, it was still focused on Gu Fei, proving that Gu Fei's spell damage was extremely high. Considering how any target that he slashed would usually be insta-killed, maintaining this boss's aggro was an easy task. The brigand leader rushed toward Gu Fei in large strides and moved to slash him once more. To these students, The monster's slash was fast and vicious that it seemed capable of cleaving their teacher in half. They quickly bestowed heal onto Gufei, yet he actually sidestepped to let the attack pass by. With a flip of his hand, he chanted a familiar incantation and a flaming arc flowed past the brigand leader's head. The two of them kept hacking at each other like this. At first, the students were somewhat worried for Gufei and occasionally called out, "Sir, be careful." The priests were even more nervous and they would tremblingly bestow heal on Gufei every time they saw the brigand leader's saber come near him. The melee job classes wished to lend Gufei a hand, but the fight's fast tempo did not give them any opportunities to step in. The ranged job classes feared that they instead would accidentally shoot Gufei with how near the brigand leader was to their teacher. Ironically, the calmest individual in the whole group was actually the one doing the fighting. The brigand leader had only managed to score a hit on Gufei before because it had not emitted any killing intent. Now that Gufei was fighting it head on, he was not at a disadvantage in the least. The brigand leader's attack patterns were similar to any normal brigand, except that its every blow was stronger, moves were faster, and damage was higher. This brigand leader did not seem to have any unique or weird new skill in its arsenal. Despite that, Gufei remained vigilant for any change to the situation. Based on his experience facing the mountain bandit leader Sato in the past, all bosses should have an ultimate move that could turn the tide of a fight in their favor. Gufei kept blocking, but the brigand leader never once unleashed an ultimate move, causing his heart to be filled with confusion. On the student's end, their emotions had long since settled. The priests were no longer nervously bestowing heal on Gufei, while the other job classes no longer strove to lend him a hand. Even Afa changed his words to, "Sir, slow down. Don't cut him down. We need him alive." "Alive? How do I capture him alive?" Gufei asked, somewhat frustrated. He really hated holding back. The mission did not mention this. Alpha was shocked. Although the quest required for them to capture the brigand leader alive, it never stated how it could be accomplished or the condition that would make the boss surrender to them. "Should we find some rope to tie him up?" The students began to discuss possible solutions for this problem. "Knock him out." "But none of us knows bludgeon," the thieves exclaimed. The skill could only be acquired by them at level 36, but even the highest level player in Ultimate Class 3, which was Alpha, was only at level 34. Gufei, who was exchanging blows with the boss, felt that its movement somehow slackened. Gufei's mana had long been used up, which was why this fight with the brigand leader had lasted for a long time. The boss would have long been dead had he been able to cast Twin Incineration. Gufei no longer wanted to drag the fight further, so he aimed to stab the enemy. It was at this point that the brigand leader suddenly knelt on the ground and announced his surrender. "Oh, so this is how we capture him alive!" The students exclaimed in joy as they began to chatter among themselves once more. Gufei found it rather comical. Since he no longer had to stab the brigand leader, he merely kept his sword to his side, addressing Afa, "Does this work for you?" Afa happily nodded his head. "The mission will be completed once we bring him back and hand him over to Yunjuan City's NPC prison." Gufei nodded his head. Just as he was about to say something, the kneeling brigand leader suddenly sprang up, took out a huge bronze saber, and slid it over to Gufei with a twist of his hand. This brutal strike was extremely quick, and Gufei was slightly taken aback by it. Thankfully, his reaction speed was not lacking. The sword he was holding to his side flew over horizontally and blocked the sneak attack in the nick of time. The brigand leader did not pull his saber back once it clashed with Gufei's. Instead, the boss deviated from its usual attack pattern by continuing to press the saber down toward Gufei's chest. Gufei used his two hands to support the blade that was blocking the brigand leader's saber, yet he was still unable to stop the pressure being exerted on him. In the end, it hit him right onto his chest. Gufei's HP began to diminish at a rapid rate. To make matters worse, force was continuously being applied on the saber. The brigand leader showed no signs of relenting, as if he intended to drag Gufei down to the grave with him. Gufei tried to beat a hasty retreat, yet the boss chased after him to continue pressuring him. The boss's strength was astonishing. Gufei no longer had any other trick up his sleeve to extricate himself from this quandary now that he had taken the route of matching his strength with the boss's. Eventually, Gufei found himself back against the valley's rocky hill slope. His back was leaning on the cliff face even as he put his all into pushing the saber away with his sword. Meanwhile, The brigand leader did not show even the slightest intention to loosen the pressure on him. "This sucks." Gu Fei's heart was in distress. He had always been prepared for the boss to use some sort of ultimate skill, yet he had never expected that its ultimate move would begin with its fake surrender. Which motherfucking designer came up with this? Gu Fei cursed internally. He was unable to think of any method to get out of this. Strength was his weakest stat as a mage. Right now, he had no means to withstand the brigand leader's force and his HP continued to drop rapidly. Was there any way for him to escape this predicament? Fortunately, Gu Fei was not fighting alone. The students who were lost in a daze returned to their senses upon realizing their teacher's precarious situation. Seeing that Gu Fei was being pressed against the base of the cliff, all of them hurriedly assisted him. Those that could heal did so, and those that could fight attacked the brigand leader. Each of them did their best without a care for their safety. The brigand leader once more displayed the one-track mentality that the system had programmed into it. Ignoring the flood of arrows, daggers, axes, swords, and other weapons that landed on its back, the boss continued to push Gu Fei against the rock face. Gu Fei was utterly dumbfounded by this boss's tenacity. Under the priest's support, Gu Fei's HP was once more saved from the brink of depletion. No matter how hard the brigand tried, it was no longer a threat to Gu Fei. With the student's attacks peppering its back, it was only a matter of time before this fight tilted back in their favor. Gu Fei persisted as the priests kept on healing him and the others continued to attack the boss as best as they could. The brigand leader finally depleted its strength and stumbled onto the ground. Gu Fei no longer dared to be careless this time. He consumed a piece of fruit to replenish his mana before carefully approaching the boss's body. His sword poked and his feet prodded. Seeing that the brigand leader was no longer moving to counterattack, he glanced at the surrounding students. He still had doubts in his mind, so he asked Alpha, "Think we're good now?" When it came to gaming matters, Gu Fei was unsure if he was any better than his students. Although Alpha was quite knowledgeable about MMOs, he was actually worse than Gu Fei when it came to this fully immersive game. He hemmed and hawed, unsure of how to answer his question. In the end, it was the other low-level students that dared to come forward to tie the brigand leader like a rice dumpling superscript 1 with a rope that they got somewhere. Since they had low levels, it would not be too much of a loss if they lost a level from dying. The brigand leader did not react throughout this process. Everyone sighed in relief when the deed was done and finally considered today's quest as accomplished. 2 students, who had picked the warrior job class, came forward to lift up the now bounded brigand leader like luggage. Following this, the students happily began to make their way back to the city. Even Gu Fei, who had nearly been killed a few times, perked up and yelled at the students to neatly line themselves up like before. It was as if Gu Fei had rained on their parade as the elated students instantly seemed to look half a head shorter. However, none of them dared to disobey the teacher's order and could only obediently form up the neat rows, making their way back to Yunjuan City under Alpha's cadence of 1, 2, 1, 2. Unbeknown to them, some people were quietly waiting for their arrival by the entrance to the valley. Chapter 235, Competitive Quest. The members of Ultimate Class 3 Guild proceeded to the valley's entryway in an orderly fashion. The lack of any onlookers made them feel less embarrassed and caused their jubilation at capturing the brigand leader to gradually rise. Gu Fei smiled dryly to himself. They are just a bunch of kids through and through, making them feel awkward is really not easy. Along the way, they encountered a party that was heading inside the valley. This party of 27 players felt somewhat intimidated by Ultimate Class 3's high form of discipline, which was displayed through the neat rows of students marching in unison. Moments later, these 27 men saw the 2 warriors among Gu Fei's group were carrying a tightly bound boss, causing the men's expression to become somewhat unnatural. "So that's how it is," all of them furtively whispered to one another. Among these 27 men, 4 were regarding the disciplined procession with stiff upper lips. They did not display any emotion on their faces at the sight of the bound brigand leader. Each of them seemed to have readily accepted this truth and was merely surprised by the students' orderly lines. Teams that had discipline would definitely be able to fight better, which was particularly important in a group PvP. Discipline was not how people called it in MMOs, though, instead, People would say that the players in a group had excellent teamwork that was derived from the tacit understanding the players had formed with one another. It was easy for 3 or 5 individuals to cultivate this understanding with one another, but it was highly difficult for a group of 30, 50, or even 100 players to have such strong bond and understanding. Such level of rapport would have to be nurtured over time and be forcefully changed from good understanding into a form of discipline. Achieving discipline in a group was undoubtedly a very agonizing matter. Entertainment was the core of MMOs, so few people would want to be under strict rules or discipline. Therefore, seeing such a team that showed high level of discipline was truly astonishing. Such a team will most likely have high combat might, everyone subconsciously thought. Fortunately, there was a way to check the actual combat strength of a player in game: appraisal skill. Each of these 27 players chose a target and appraised him or her. What they saw next gave them the biggest shock of their lives. This team did not even have a player above level 35. Furthermore, this bunch of players showed listless expression on their faces at the sight of the 27 men. Their steps became lackadaisical and their neat marching suddenly became somewhat disorderly. This was a given, though, as the students felt embarrassed to continue walking in neat rows upon seeing the presence of others. Quite a few of the 27 men expressed glee at this. As the team of students brushed past them on their way out of the valley, the 27 men looked at one another questioningly. Finally, someone addressed the 4 calm men among them. "Are we still doing it?" Someone from the 4 men replied, "You guys can decide this for yourselves. But since you guys have picked up a competitive quest, the reward we have originally discussed will be doubled. This can be considered as a PvP, so the potential cost for this upcoming clash will be added to the total." "We know that." The person who had asked the question nodded his head in acknowledgement. He turned to his 22 companions to discuss the matter first before saying to the 4, "But these guys don't really look strong. Perhaps, we won't need your help." The 4 merely chuckled at this before saying, "They indeed seem quite weak. But even if we don't lend you guys a hand in this fight, the deposit you've paid won't be refunded. We'll simply waive the remaining fee that was originally agreed on. We hope you understand that." "Of course, we do." The man nodded his head once more. "However, we will stay here. If you guys ever need our help, we will immediately come to your aid. Does that work for you?" The 4 players had already seen through these men's intention and gave them the most satisfying answer. The man did not speak further and just turned his head over to his 22 companions to exchange a few more words. The 23 men silently took out their weapons and initiated their sneak attack onto the back of someone from Ultimate Class 3. The archer's arrows were the first to arrive by a target. They targeted the last person walking behind the opposing guild. Unexpectedly, that person swiftly pivoted as he pulled out a sword from within his dimensional pocket. A few waves of his sword swatted off the arrows heading his way. "What are you guys doing?" Gouffet had long since felt that something was not right with these 20-odd men. He would have dodged the incoming arrows, which was the safest move for him, had he not been worried that they would hit his students, instead. Hence, he had chosen to risk injuring himself by blocking the arrows. Thankfully, none of the enemy archers had used a skill in their attacks, so the 4 arrows that had been shot were easily deflected by him. These men seemed to have deemed it wasteful to use powerful skills to assassinate a mere mage like him. A black robe and a dark purple sword. His attire quickly grabbed the 4 men's attention. Although this was the first time they had seen this get up for themselves, it had actually been the hot topic in Yunjuan City and within their group. This person was the Mage of Young Masters Elite, 1,000 Miles Drunk. He was the one opponent the Black Hand had focused most of its attention on, since their mercenary group would be facing him and the rest of Young Masters Elite in the finals of the mercenary PvP tournament. These 4 men were relieved once they identified Gouffet, as things began to make sense. They had originally been somewhat surprised that this group of below level 35 players had managed to take down a boss. By the looks of things, this party had hired a mercenary group to help it. However, Young Masters Elite had only sent out 1 person. This clearly shows that the mercenary group truly possessed indomitable strength. The students with Gouffet were in an uproar when they became aware of the situation that they were currently in. "We're really sorry, we took up a competitive quest, Someone among the 23 men gave this simple explanation: competitive quest. Gufei had heard of this term before. According to Brother Assist, the system would design certain content in the game as a competitive quest, so that players could take up opposing sides and pit themselves against one another for a reward. In a competitive quest, the players were no longer fighting with the system but with other players like themselves. Most competitive quests were for guilds or mercenary groups. Rarely was there this competitive element to solo content. What's the completion condition for your quest? Gufei asked. Since they were all doing quests, there really was no way to say who was in the right or wrong. It was therefore best to find a peaceful resolution for this. To kill off the brigand leader while he is being escorted, the opposing team replied. As a small guild, they were not confident to face off against a boss by themselves for this quest, so they quickly contacted the Black Hand, the largest mercenary group in Yanjuan City, for aid. The Black Hand had become a reputable mercenary group among the players, so its credibility was more or less guaranteed. Most people would not go to the Hall of Mercenaries to set a mission when looking for external aid. Although it was safer to go through the system and create missions, players would then stumble into the system's unavoidable intermediary fee. Thus, most players would be more than happy to make a private deal with a mercenary group as long as its credibility was proven. The two parties had easily agreed on a price and a deposit had quickly been passed from one hand to another. Following this, players from both sides gathered by one of the city gates and headed toward the system-provided coordinates to complete the mission. Very soon after, they caught sight of Gufei and the members of Ultimate Class 3 Guild by the valley's entryway. The stage for this competitive quest was essentially set once these men identified the students as the guild tasked to deliver the brigand leader. Gufei quietly cursed at how despicable the system was once he heard the opposing team's quest completion condition. Ultimate Class 3 was required to capture the brigand leader alive, while the opposing guild was tasked to dispose of the boss. There was simply no room for discussion, as the interest of both teams clearly clashed just by this fact alone. "I'm sorry, but our mission is to capture him alive," Gufei apologetically said. "Naturally, it's a competitive quest, after all, so it's understandable for our quest conditions to differ," the opponent replied. At this point in time, someone from the opposing guild used appraisal on Gufei and reported his findings. "Careful. This guy is at level 40. Oh, a level 40 player has established a small guild and recruited these newbies." These players of a small guild incorrectly deduced as they did not know of Gufei's identity. "So, how are we going to do this?" Gufei sighed. "We won't forfeit our mission," the opposing guild resolutely declared. Gufei turned to look at his students and laughed. "Naturally, we won't be forfeiting either. Since that's the case." The opposing players each gripped their weapons to show their intention to fight. "Is there really no other way?" Gufei recalled the duel system that people used to fight over grinding spots. But while a new grinding spot could be found once a group lost to another, a quest would not have such an alternate solution once it was failed. Despite competitive quests being very contentious, the players never complained about this, especially upon seeing the system's rich rewards for this sort of quests. Therefore, few people would feel awkward about taking up a competitive quest. Instead, players would often celebrate if they acquired one. There was simply no way for them to abandon such a quest. In fact, the players of this small guild felt very excited when they found out that the quest that they had gotten was a competitive type, and they were even more excited when they learned that they were up against weaker players. Why in the world would they give this competitive quest up with these? When Gufei asked for other means to resolve the matter, they did not even bother to consider it. The 4 players of the Black Hand mercenary group came forward at this point and asked the leader of the small guild, "Are you sure you don't want our help?" As the guild leader looked at the 4 men questioningly, one of them pressed on, "Have you never heard of this player called Thousand Miles Drunk?" "Ah!" everyone exclaimed in shock. Gufei's identity had recently been exposed, but the rumors involving him had originated from long ago. At present, he was undisputedly viewed as the top player in Yanjuan City. "I heard that wherever this person points his sword, the opponent will instantly turn to ash, as he possesses Herculean strength specially gifted by the system. I heard that not even 20 or 30 men can take him down. Also, that he decimated the 750 players of Carouse by himself." Rumors of Gufei's lethality were blown out of proportions. As the members of the small guild continued to discuss the hearsays about Gufei, their initial excitement disappeared and they began to feel disgruntled about facing off against such a formidable foe. The 4 players of the Black Hand approached Ultimate Class 3, and the one at the very front of the pack chuckled toward Gufei, "To think we would meet like this before the finals. Who are you?" Gufei nationally did not know who these people were. "The name's Monologue Under the Moon," the person replied, adding, "And I, along with these 3, are from the Black Hand mercenary group." Chapter 236, A Little Bit of Mana. The Black Hand mercenary group. Gufei could not help but do a double take at the people standing before him upon hearing the name. They were people he and the rest of Young Masters Elite would be facing in the finals of the mercenary PvP tournament. After all, judging from their attire, Monologue Under the Moon was a priest, and the other 3 were a warrior, a thief, and a mage. While the members of the small guild showed a fearful look on their faces upon learning of Gufei's identity as the insta-kill mage, the 4 men had self-assured stances. Gufei determined these 4 men's intention and addressed the small guild. "Did you guys hire a mercenary group to help you? So you guys are confident of accomplishing this quest and don't plan to give it up? Aren't you guys the same?" The opposing guild retorted. "We?" Gufei looked at his students and laughed bitterly. Not only was he helping these students complete their quest for free, he was also going to give them equipment when they got back. How was he a hired mercenary in this case? Seeing that the other side was not willing to back down, Gufei simply pulled out his Moonlit Nightfalls and pointed it toward them. "Since this is how it's going to be, I won't be courteous then." Twin Incineration. Incinerate. Gufei flicked his sword to his left and right. 2 thieves on stealth faded into view with a surprised expression on their faces before disappearing once more. Gufei saw a similar expression on everyone's face whenever he managed to hit a thief who was on stealth. He really wanted to tell all the thieves out there to stop trying to attack him while on stealth, since it was useless against him. And if the thieves chose to use stealth still, they should at least careful on how they attacked him with it. "I have an item that can counter stealth, so don't." Gufei was trying to tell these players about the redundancy of their action when he was interrupted by a cry from one of his students standing behind him. A thief seemed to have carefully mixed into the crowd of students to stealthily dispose of the brigand leader that was already in a critical condition. In the end, the thief accidentally stepped on a student's foot and got revealed. This made Gufei's kind words seem like a lie. "Didn't you just say that you have equipment that counters stealth? Our man has already sneaked into your group without you realizing it, so what lie are you spouting?" Still, Gufei had indeed killed off those 2 thieves that had been trying to sneak up on him. Everyone was baffled and went into deep thought about this. What else could that lone enemy thief within the group of students expect at this point? He tried to get out of the group, but the students were no pushovers, so he was very handily defeated by the joint attack of over 20 of them. Although his death was tragic, he was still luckier than those 2 thieves that had died by Gufei's attack. Ultimate Class 3 and the opposing guild were in the middle of a competitive quest, and only one of these 2 sides was bound to succeed in it. Since the only way to resolve this matter was through PvP, the game officials did not wish to be vicious with the players. Therefore, during the competitive quest, the PvP penalty for the players on either side would be under a different set of rules. Players who died during this PvP engagement would not lose a whole level but would instead lose 20% of their experience points. In addition, killing a player would not add perk value on either side's individual. As for Gufei, he technically did not belong to either side. Anyone he killed would be dictated by the traditional PvP rules. Hence, those 2 thieves he had killed off just lost a level each as Gufei's perk value had increased by 2 points. On the flip side, those members of the Black Hand mercenary group shared the same condition with Gufei. Had they taken up this mercenary mission from the system, they would have enjoyed the exemptions of the competitive quest. Although they would suffer a slightly harsher penalty of a 30% experience loss instead of the 20%, it was still better than losing a whole level outright. Since the Black Hand and the small guild conducted this business still privately, The 4 men would not experience this protection of the system for this mission. The members of Ultimate Class 3 became bolder with the swift deaths of the opposing small guild's 3 men, and they began to clamor about taking down the opponents in one fell swoop. "What are you making a ruckus for?" Gufei bellowed at them. When all the students instantly became subdued, he commanded, "Line up and head back to the city." "Ah?" The students expressed their shock. "Leave this to me," Gufei solemnly said. "Sir." All the students felt touched. Since they did not know that their teacher's favorite pastime was to PvP, they were adamant about not leaving Gufei to his death while they got away unscathed. Left with no other choice, as he could not possibly kill his students to send them back to the city, he could only helplessly say, "Retreat over to the side, then let teacher here give you guys a lesson on PvP." The word lesson immediately gave the students goosebumps, and each of them showed an annoyed expression. "Wait till you see teacher's kung fu." Gufei had long wanted to demonstrate his kung fu to his students, but he had regrettably never had a chance to do so in reality. "Oh, no, teacher has gone crazy again," the students whispered this to one another. "Teacher really knows kung fu." Alpha seriously told his fellow classmates. "Oh, my. Alpha has gone crazy, too. Is this the side effect of playing Parallel World for long?" They began to wonder. It was Gufei's turn to give them a withering look. Thinking that he could only prove it to the students through his actions, he took 2 steps forward. "Seems like we can only settle this through PvP." Monologue Under the Moon still had that faint smile on his lips. He had already carefully observed the enemy's composition. Besides Gufei, the other 24 players were very young and therefore lacked enough combat experience. He could not help but wonder about the nature of this group. Whatever the case might be, their only opponent right now was Gufei alone, and the others could easily be dealt with after. "Come on, then." The small guild's players did not move and merely looked at Monologue Under the Moon and his 3 other companions. Gufei was undoubtedly a formidable foe, and getting killed by him would cause them to lose level. They felt that they should not waste the gold coins that they had spent hiring these members of the Black Hand mercenary group, and they prepared to use the 4 men to hold Gufei down long enough for them to bully the kids. The 23 men's goal was to complete the quest by killing off the brigand leader, after all, so they actually did not need to eliminate many of the enemy players. Whether they would continue to fight afterward or not would depend on their opponent's reaction. Gufei, meanwhile, already resolved to resist them. Since this PvP was for his students, Gufei abandoned his favorite method of diving headfirst into the enemy's ranks to fight them in close combat. Wielding the moonlit nightfalls in hand, he cast Descending Wheel of Flames and Blazing Tree of 1,000 Inferno. Avoiding Gufei's spells was simply a mind game. His current opponents scattered about when they heard him chanting. When nothing happened after Gufei had finished his chanting, they stopped running away and hesitated over whether to attack him or not. Before long, however, flames sprouted from beneath the ground and a circle of fire emerged in the sky. These enemies that faced Gufei for the first time were utterly dumbfounded at the scene unfolding before them. Those who had unluckily fled into the AO of Gufei's preemptively cast spell were expectedly insta-killed. "Yay!" All the students cheered. Gufei eyed Monologue Under the Moon and the other 3 men of the Black Hand mercenary group. These 4 were indeed experts. Gufei had included them into his trap, yet they had very easily avoided his spell. Deducing Gufei's intention was easy once an opponent had understanding of his unique points. When Gufei was chanting an incantation, there was no need for a player to run away in a hurry. Instead, he or she should note where Gufei was pointing at. Walking away slowly from that spot would do. In fact, that was how Brave Surge had previously escaped Gufei's AO spell. "Looks like I'll have to fight at close range," Gufei said to himself as he rushed over to them. "Miles bro, you can probably only cast 1 spell, right?" The opponent laughed. "You guys have a pretty good understanding of my capabilities," Gufei commended. He had used Twin Incineration to kill the 2 thieves from before. With the 2 AO spells he had just unleashed, he only had enough mana to cast 1 last powerful spell. "There are many of us here, are you planning to kill us all?" Monologue Under the Moon asked while chuckling. "That's what I'm good at," Gufei replied as he darted toward him. Arctic Whirlwind. The water mage in the midst of the enemy's formation unleashed his spell by waving his staff about. Circling over Monologue Under the Moon, Arctic Whirlwind headed toward Gufei. Monologue Under the Moon was a priest, so he naturally did not intend to stay in the front line of the skirmish. He promptly retreated to the back, as the warrior and thief flanked Arctic Whirlwind's left and right and dove toward Gufei. 3 separate attacks headed toward Gufei in quick succession. Gufei originally intended to insta-kill the 2 players using twin incineration while he dispersed Arctic Whirlwind, but the opponents did not give him the chance to do so. Truly, the 4 players of the Black Hand had a good understanding of Gufei. Gufei took several steps backward, yet the enemies did not press on together. Gufei's sword point flicked and he suddenly activated his blink, appearing right behind the enemy mage with a swish. This action was still within the enemy's realm of expectation, though. Monologue Under the Moon promptly bestowed heal onto the mage and smilingly said to Gufei, "Blink? Doesn't that mean that you're out of mana now?" Gufei smiled back at him as his sword lashed out, yet this attack was directed at the magic staff that the mage was holding. "Ah!" the mage exclaimed, clearly not expecting Gufei to do such a thing. Arctic Whirlwind was a spell that could be controlled if it remained channeled. Not only did the mage who was controlling Arctic Whirlwind get interrupted by his move, Gufei also managed to close in on him. Batting the mage's magic staff askew instead of attacking him caused Arctic Whirlwind to lose direction and to hit the warrior beside it. Gufei turned around and raised his sword, Thunderbolt. Strike! A crackle of lightning arced down and struck a thief dead center, instantly killing the player. Gufei looked at Monologue Under the Moon with a bright smile on his lips. "I've still got a little bit of mana." With that, he held Moonlit Nightfalls in his left hand and pulled out Sacred Flames of Baptism with his right hand. Monologue Under the Moon raised his holy staff to bestow heal, yet the sword on Gufei's left hand landed on him at this point. Although it did not do much damage, it nevertheless successfully interrupted his casting. "You may have the mana, but can you cast your skills?" Gufei asked with a smile on his lips. The enemy mage had received 2 slashes from him by now. Chapter 237, Perfect Record. One of Gufei's 2 slashes procced the additional fire attack. This was actually no surprise since Gufei's proc rate for the additional fire attack was at 50%. However, the current players were not easy to insta-kill like in the past. Moreover, Gufei saw Monologue Under the Moon incessantly bestowing heal on the mage he was trying to quickly dispose of. Meanwhile, the enemy warrior's already slow movement speed was further slowed by his mage companion's recently cast Arctic Whirlwind. Since 2 or 3 meters would now take the warrior quite some time to traverse, what more would the 5-meter distance he had with Gufei? Monologue Under the Moon naturally did not foolishly stand there. Since heal was not a skill that required proximity to its target to work, he could stand far away to counter Gufei's ability to interrupt his heal with a mere extension of his arm. Following this train of thought, Monologue Under the Moon quickly retreated a few steps as he lifted his magic staff to chant once more. "Hiya!" Gufei shouted. In the next instant, Monologue Under the Moon's eyes bulged as he saw Gufei's Sacred Flames of Baptism fly toward him. Monologue Under the Moon did not retreat very far, so the Chinese broadsword managed to strike his forehead, interrupting his heal once more. Gufei then used the sword in his right hand to stab the mage twice more. At close range, Gufei reduced the poor mage into nothing but a punching bag. This was especially the case since the enemy mage's wish to receive Monologue Under the Moon's heal never came to be. Gufei's stars aligned at the moment as his Moonlit Nightfall's fatal blow and his additional fire attack procced simultaneously. Given that the physical damage Gufei dealt was not low, the mage could only throw Monologue Under the Moon a resentful gaze before dying. The warrior only managed to arrive at the skirmish at this point and determinedly used the charge skill at Gufei. Gufei nimbly dodged the moving block of metal hurtling toward him and casually slashed at Monologue Under the Moon once more. An unprotected priest was as pitiful as an undefended mage. Gufei flipped the dropped Sacred Flames of Baptism up in the air with his foot. Arming himself with his sword and the Chinese broadsword, he began to rain blows onto Monologue Under the Moon with reckless abandon. Even his legs joined in on the fun and swiftly delivered brutal kicks to Monologue Under the Moon from time to time. Monologue Under the Moon could only blame himself for striking at the wrong time. Gufei was usually not so unconstrained when he PvP'd, so he failed to see the logic in executing attacks that would not deal damage. Unfortunately for his enemies, He was currently demonstrating the extent of his kung fu to his students. Monologue Under the Moon had thus become the perfect recipient of all his attacks. The warrior over by the side was in tears as well. The freeze effect of Arctic whirlwind had yet to end, so he could only watch Gufei unrelentingly attack Monologue Under the Moon as they got further and further away from him. He really wanted to assist the priest, yet his reduced speed would simply not allow it. He could only blame the fact that his friend Mage was wearing a lot of equipment that enhanced the effect of freeze, causing it to last for such a long time. The priest Monologue Under the Moon had no combat skill whatsoever, so he could only bear Gufei's endless blows until he finally turned into a stream of white light. What was more infuriating was the way that Gufei had smiled at him right before his death. "See you later in the PvP match." It was already too late when the warrior regained his normal movement speed, as the one-sided beating was already over. With his slow speed, his current dilemma was on how to catch up with Gufei if the latter decided to kite him. In the end, he was forced to bear the shame and watched as Gufei gave him a wide berth by returning to his student's side. Those players of the small guild had not once stepped in to assist the four members of the Black Hand when Gufei was bullying them and instead chose to risk their lives targeting Gufei's students. This small guild's number was at a clear disadvantage after suffering one of Gufei's spells, so the students laboriously managed to kill off 3 more of them. Defeating the small guild was only a matter of time now. "I'm back!" Gufei yelled as he pointed his sword upward and roared, blazing 3 of 1,000 inferno. "Arise!" Descending wheel of flames. Descend! Gufei smoothly chanted the spells, yet the players of the opposing guild that had learned their lesson last time did not flee and instead chose to locate where Gufei was pointing his sword. Gufei was unfazed by their action and merely continued to point out a direction, causing the ones in that area to quickly flee for their lives. They had previously heard Monologue Under the Moon and Gufei talk about the latter running out of mana, yet he had still managed to cast Thunderbolt after. Even when he was engaged in melee with them, his twin incinerations seemed to flare from time to time as well. Facing the insta-kill Mage, none of them dared to bet their lives on the possibility of Gufei running out of mana. In the end, everyone who had scrambled to dodge the incoming spells was bamboozled. Gufei had truly run out of mana when he had cast that Thunderbolt spell. When the small guild's players became distracted by Gufei's deadly might, the students were able to use that chance to send a hail of arrows and spells to them. Although the students did not have much power in their attacks, they still managed to severely injure their enemies. The students enthusiastically surged toward the enemies amid Gufei's shout of, "Hey, leave me some! Sir, watch what we can do!" The students were still worried about Gufei, so they bravely and diligently eliminated the opposing guild, not sparing a bit of thought about teacher Gufei's true feelings. Gufei stopped caring about his image as a teacher when he was presented with such a situation and just rolled up his sleeves to enter the fray and fight for kills with his students. The students uniformly pushed onward, leaving Gufei by himself to attack the center of the enemy's formation. Alpha very anxiously called out from way behind, "Sir, escape quickly! I'm about to cast my spell." "Just cast it, then I'll dodge it once you do," Gufei replied. He then waved his magic staff and cast Ascending Wheel of Flames himself. Gufei was well within the spell's AO and did not seem to have any intention of dodging it as he continued to slash at the enemies ruthlessly. His attacks forcefully prevented many enemies from escaping his Descending Wheel of Flames as well. The flame wheel came crashing down with Gufei right in the midst of it. The small guild's players were already in a precarious state due to their diminished HP, so quite a few of them were killed off after taking Alpha's spell. Gufei glimpsed about him and quickly counted that 7 men were left. Shocked, Alpha asked aloud from behind, "Sir, why didn't you dodge it?" Gufei looked backward and could not help but deride, "Dodge what? Do you think you're me?" The students burst into laughter. Truly, Alpha's spell damage was absolutely incomparable to Gufei's. Gufei's Descending Wheel of Flames could easily send people back to the spawn points in the city if they chose to not dodge it, whereas Alpha's Flame Wheel could definitely not insta-kill anyone who took it head-on. As such, simply bearing the damage was no big deal. Gufei's sword rose and cut deeply, killing yet another player. He then proceeded to address the remaining 6 men. "So, shall we forget about this? The small guild's leader had lost his life earlier in the battle, so none of the remaining 6 men could make a decision, unsure how if they should respond. Gu Fei glanced over and saw that the Black Hand's warrior was standing still by the other side. He was an expert, after all, and could judge the situation better than the average players. Dying and losing a level for this mission was pointless since the enemies knew that his side no longer had the chance to emerge victorious. We're all doing a quest, so we won't be cruel. You guys can leave. Gu Fei magnanimously waved his hand off to dismiss them. The 6 men exchanged glances before glancing over to the Black Hand's warrior. Unsure of how to broach this situation, the 7 of them could only lower their head and leave accordingly. Gu Fei turned back to look at his students and saw that they were grinning from ear to ear in their excitement at winning this fight as they bragged to one another about how wonderful they had performed in the PvP. Pipe down. Gu Fei put his Chinese broadsword into his dimensional pocket and raised his sword. Where's our class monitor? Come out and bring us back to the city. Class monitor is dead. The students replied. Their voice did not have any trace of sadness and some of them even displayed gleeful expression at their classmates' misfortune. Gu Fei suspected that this lot of brats had pushed their class monitor to bear the initial attack's brunt, otherwise, why would they be so happy about it? After lining up and taking a head count, the students realized that 6 of them had died as well. Fortunately, their deaths were at the hands of the opposing guild, so they only lost 20% of experience points for their current levels. Their opponents had it worse. Most of them died by Gu Fei's hands, so they naturally each lost a level. This was especially true of Monologue Under the Moon and the 2 other members of the Black Hand. They had way higher levels compared to the small guild's men, so the total amount of experience points that they had lost was scarily high. Alright, let's head back to the city. Gu Fei motioned for the students to line themselves up and continued to head back to Yanjuan City in cadence. All of them were currently feeling very excited, so they were incessantly chattering on the way back to the city. These students now knew what the philosophy about living a life under the shade of a big tree meant after this encounter. Had it not been for their teacher Gu Fei, none of them would have stood a chance against anything by themselves. Even Afa, the most powerful player among them, was incomparable to Gu Fei just from his "do you think you're me" question. The students felt extremely excited, so Gu Fei refrained from dampening their spirits and merely beamed brightly as he followed behind the troop of students. While the students were feeling elated at the fight's outcome, those players who had suffered a defeat at the hands of Gu Fei were not feeling happy in the least. Naturally, this was how competitive quests went. The losing sides would usually bemoan their inability to complete their quests and the losses they incurred from the fights and would not really feel resentment toward their opponents. In fact, it was Monologue Under the Moon and the other members of the Black Hand that were feeling resentful. Since they failed to help their clients accomplish their competitive quest, they had to not only return the deposit but also pay compensation in accordance to their mercenary group's rules to maintain a good image. Simply put, although the small guild's quest failed, the Black Hand's compensation would at least provide some relief to their bruised egos. As for the Black Hand's 4 players, not only did 3 of them had lost their lives, they also had to pay compensation. What was worse was that their group's track record of a 100% completion rate had been lost. In hopes of salvaging this loss, Monologue Under the Moon tried negotiating with their client, the small guild leader. When the latter asked for refund and subsequent compensation, "Has the quest indicated you've failed yet?" Nope. Do you wish to complete it, then? Of course, we do. How about we gather more manpower and try again? The price would still be the same as what we have previously agreed on. How about that? The small guild could not ask for anything more, so they quickly agreed. Head over to the Hall of Mercenaries and submit an employment request. We'll do this through the system this time. The small guild's men quickly departed for the Hall of Mercenaries. People would definitely choose to go through the system upon knowing that their quests were competitive type. Monologue Under the Moon reported this matter on the Mercenary channel. Upon hearing that their clients' opponents had employed the help of Young Masters Elite, quite a few members expressed their interest in the matter and volunteered to participate in the operation. A new team was once more gathered within Yanjuan City. Chapter 238, A cicada casting off its golden shell monologue under the moon headed to Yunju City's north gate to meet with the other members of the Black Hand mercenary group as he sent over a member with fast movement speed to the Hall of Mercenaries to accept the small guild's request. There were many perks, besides having a larger player capacity, to a mercenary group being at a high level. For instance, a level 1 mercenary group could only pick up one mission at a time from the system, while a level 5 mercenary group could do 5 missions simultaneously. Naturally, the system had no way of limiting the amount of missions mercenaries could take from others in private. Furthermore, a high-level mercenary group could assign certain members to have the right to accept missions, just like how that player monologue under the moon had sent to the Hall of Mercenaries could accept missions on behalf of the Black Hand. Over by the North Gate, Monologue under the moon immediately spotted his fellow mercenaries chatting with one another when he got there. His comrades quickly greeted Monologue under the moon upon seeing him as well and started to inquire about the strength of Thousand Miles Drunk. Monologue under the moon forlornly spoke about the matter at hand to them. Rumors had it that Thousand Miles Drunk was a mage that could insta-kill opponents through his monstrously high spell damage. And yet, he had only used the defensive skill Blink against the 4 of them and had electrified a thief by casting Thunderbolt once. As for him and his companion, Monologue under the moon and the mage were actually brutally slashed to death by Gufei's sword. In any case, Thousand Miles Drunk's 2 major weaknesses of possessing low mana and having slow casting speed had more or less been confirmed. These 2 weaknesses were not just disadvantageous to a mage, they also could be seen as extremely dangerous, if not fatal. Ironically, Thousand Miles Drunk continued to achieve amazing feats in game even now. He was even publicly acknowledged as the #1 expert in Yunjuan City. All of them could just not wrap their heads around this. Come on, everyone. Let's try to come up with a solution for this. Monologue under the moon urged everyone to think of a way to deal with Gufei. Is it really that difficult? A mage with a slow casting speed means that it's easier to avoid his spells. His low mana means we can quickly deplete his mana pool by luring him into using his spells. What use is there for someone to have high spell damage if he has no mana left to use it? Someone among them could not help but pose this question. It was indeed the most logical approach to this matter. Monologue under the moon and his 3 companions had in fact set up a plan in line with this way of thinking in that fight before, yet none of them had expected for Gufei to be impossible to deal with in melee despite his lack of mana. Monologue under the moon felt that things had gone awry due to him not taking into consideration such a possibility. Had he made preparations for such a probability, things would not have been that disastrous. Now that he had more skilled players with him and a deeper understanding of their opponent's capability, they should have no problems dealing with Gufei this time around. At this point, they received the message that the Black Hand had successfully accepted the small guild's request by the Hall of Mercenaries. The mission logs of the Black Hand's members got updated with a new mission that the system had created on behalf of their client. After a while, the small guild's leader along with his men came rushing toward them. Seeing the presence of so many members of the Black Hand, the guild leader timidly asked if they had to pay extra money for this. Of course, not. We have caused you guys to suffer a loss due to our lack of understanding of the opponent's strength. It should be us who are apologizing to you, Monologue under the moon replied diplomatically. Honestly speaking, the small guild size could not compete with the Black Hand mercenary groups, so the guild leader felt obligated to treat these mercenaries like gods after spending quite a tidy sum to hire them and accepted their words to the point of servility. He felt overwhelmed by this unexpected favor for his small guild upon receiving the expert's calm explanation of the initial disastrous outcome of the fight for the competitive quest. Does your quest display their coordinates? Monologue under the moon asked the small guild's men. In the Black Hand's mission log, it only briefly stated about assisting the guild with whatever request it had and did not mention any information regarding the involved people for this particular competitive quest. With the completion condition for this mission, the Black Hand could only complete it once the small guild succeeded on its quest by dealing the killing blow on the brigand leader. As for the final reward, it was the employer and the Black Hand's previously agreed on price. What the employer would earn from completing this quest would have nothing to do with the Black Hand. Someone from the small guild looked at his quest log and shook his head. It's the same as when we first got this quest. It's only showing the coordinates by the entrance to Yangtze Valley. It only states to capture and dispose of the brigand leader on its way to Yunjuan City. Although the North Gate is the closest route to the city, there's no guarantee that they'll take it. Monologue Under the Moon furrowed his brows. Do you know where they'll be sending the convict to in Yunjuan City? We can simply head over and wait for their arrival there, someone suggested. The person from the small guild once more shook his head. The quest log only mentions Yunjuan City. Have you done this sort of quest before? Monologue Under the Moon asked his fellow brothers. The people in their mercenary group were all experts when it came to questing, but all of them shook their heads in response. Logically speaking, wouldn't a convict be sent to the prison? Someone opined. This is a game, perhaps. It would end after sending it to the quest hub. Perhaps, it would simply end by entering Yunjuan City's entrance. All began to voice their opinions regarding the matter, causing Monologue Under the Moon's head to hurt even more. A mercenary group was not like a large guild, so its manpower was limited. They only had over 20 men here at the North Gate, so it was not enough to split them all up. How about this? Monologue Under the Moon pointed to a few present people with faster movement speed than the rest. You guys will head out from the north, west, and east gates respectively. Choose different route toward the coordinates of Yangtze Valley and see if you can find the players of the opposing guild and determine which way they are heading. Once we located those players, we can ambush them on their way back. What does their group look like? Someone asked. Monologue Under the Moon thought for a while before giving a description of Goofei's group, an adult and a bunch of kids. Got it. The assigned people answered back, immediately setting off toward the routes that they were instructed to. After instructing his fellow mercenaries, Monologue Under the Moon addressed the small guild's players once more. You guys should hide for now. There's a chance of them recognizing some of you, which will then expose our intention. The talk was over after that. Readying their equipment for this operation, they patiently waited for their scout's report. Meanwhile, other members of the Black Hand that were interested in Thousand Miles Drunk made their way over to the North Gate once they caught wind of the matter. The purpose of these players of the Black Hand for heading there was not to help with the mission that some of their members had accepted. Instead, they were there to see for themselves and get a sense of their strongest opponent in the finals of the mercenary PvP tournament. After waiting for several minutes, one of the deployed scouts finally sent a report. I've spotted a group of players heading straight to the North Gate from the direction you have mentioned. Is it a group composed of an adult and a bunch of kids? Monologue Under the Moon asked. There's someone hanging back a little further from the main group, so I can't tell for sure. I'll get closer to check. The scout reported, saying, Man, this group is rather orderly. What do they do? That's them, alright. Monologue Under the Moon excitedly said before instructing, Don't get any closer to them. Just keep an eye on them from afar, don't let them discover you. He then told his surrounding brothers, They're coming, let's go. What about us? The small guild's players asked, unsure if the Black Hand was actually helping their guild with the quest. He felt that he was out of the loop on certain things. You guys don't have to go. Just wait for my message. Once we are done, the mission is as good as yours. Monologue Under the Moon smilingly replied. The scout kept him updated of Ultimate Class 3 guild's coordinates. Seeing that the group was almost upon them, Monologue Under the Moon hurriedly divided the players with him into 3 teams and positioned them in the left, right, and center, fanning out to attack the enemies from 3 separate directions. Monologue Under the Moon, who was situated in the middle, could see their enemies making their way over. The members of Ultimate Class 3 were still walking uniformly, shouting out a cadence from time to time and causing quite a cloud of dust to scatter about. These all became the signal for their arrival. Get ready. Monologue Under the Moon, who was hidden inside the teams, let the members whom the opponents would not recognize take the lead on this approach, each of them acting nonchalant as they closed in on Ultimate Class 3. Locate Thousand Miles Drunk first. Archers, get ready to directly insta-kill him, Monologue Under the Moon ordered. He was actually quite stunned by this turn of events. Countless of methods, such as getting several archers to bombard him with arrows on homing projectile, could be used against a mage like him, So why had he not fled yet? How in the world did such a careless man survive until now? This question was what he was most curious about. The archers hidden in their formation arched their bows with nocked arrows as they searched the neat rows of students for their target with eagle eyes. Black robe and dark purple sword. Those were Thousand Miles Drunk's signature get-up. However, no matter how much they looked, there was simply no one dressed like that in the approaching group. All of them were wearing crappy equipment and looking quite young. A bunch of kids and an adult. This approaching group was just made up of a bunch of kids. Where was the adult? Target can't be seen. Each of the archers reported accordingly. Priests did not have eagle eye, so Monologue Under the Moon could not see this for himself. Hearing the archers' reports, he wondered if they had gotten the wrong people. He brought his team along and approached the group. When he was almost in front of Ultimate Class 3, Monologue Under the Moon ascertained that they had gotten the right people. This group's formation was similar to its previous one, and some of the players in it looked familiar as well. He himself looked familiar to these children, as quite a few of them began chortling when they spotted him. Fuck, we got tricked. Monologue Under the Moon suddenly realized what had happened and looked even more closely at the enemies before them. Indeed, the bounded brigand leader was nowhere to be found. Their opponent had already expected the Black Hand to attempt another assault, so these kids had been made to divert their attention from the small 2 to 3 man squad sneakily delivering the brigand leader elsewhere. The target is not here. Monologue Under the Moon announced on the mercenary channel. Once they learned that their task was done, the players who were in charge of scouting the opponents were keenly making their way over to Monologue Under the Moon's location to have a look at the glorious insta-kill Mage. Quickly head toward the other city gates, send men to all of them. There should only be 2 or 3 of them right now, carrying a bounded brigand. Monologue Under the Moon yelled on the mercenary channel. At the same time, he sent a private message over to the player of the small guild to act as well. They could discuss the matter after they thought of a method to locate Thousand Miles Drunk and the others. The students were rocking back and forth with laughter when they arrived by Monologue Under the Moon. Our teacher has a word for you. Teacher, Thousand Miles Drunk? Monologue Under the Moon asked, confused. Yup. Our teacher said, I've already said before that we'll meet in the PvP match, so I'll only see you during it. Fuck. Monologue Under the Moon blew a gasket. He stared at this bunch of children before him and fervently wished that he could just kill them all. Chapter Notes 1. This proverb means a quick change. Chapter 239, Rotating Twin Incineration. The brat who was gleefully conversing with Monologue Under the Moon was none other than the student Afa. A kid like him did not have the prudence of an adult, so his blatant show of his mirth further infuriated Monologue Under the Moon. In the end, Monologue Under the Moon still had to care for the Black Hand's image. They were a mercenary group and not a guild. With the guild's aim to dominate others, it could get away with bullying the weak and helpless. As for a mercenary group's aim to do business online, it could never prey upon the weak. While a mercenary group could showcase its PvP prowess, it had to maintain a forthright and pristine image. Only by doing that could they be well received by the public and their business continued to grow. Thousand Miles Drunk seemed to have expected this, so he was very bold at letting this bunch of unruly, low-level children act as bait. Please pass a message from me to him as well. Tell him, I won't leave till you arrive. Monologue Under the Moon grimaced as he said that. Okay. Bye-bye. Alpha waved Monologue Under the Moon goodbye, and he along with the others mirthfully left. Their teacher was not with them now, so they no longer neatly lined themselves up and became a messy mob once more. Their orderly rows just then had unintentionally drawn the enemies toward them and had caused the opponents to view them as better players than what they really were. Everything was just a ploy. Monologue Under the Moon watched the kids go. His tightened grip on his magic staff almost stripped the lacquer off the wood. His companions could understand what he was feeling right now, and each of them came over to offer their support. Don't give up, it's not the end yet. The opponent has taken a detour, so perhaps he won't be able to enter the city so soon. We may still have time to block the city gates, someone encouraged. Oh, you're right. Monologue Under the Moon reorganized the teams once more and informed the small guild of the current situation. He even specifically emphasized that the enemies had split into 2 teams, with one group of weak children heading back via the north gate and another group entering the city through another city gate. Deep down, Monologue Under the Moon was feeling bitter that he could not vent his anger on those kids for fear of sullying his mercenary group's good name, so he could only hope that the players of the small guild would take action and kill those kids upon receiving this information. This was why he had specifically informed them of the bunch of kids heading direction. Unfortunately for him, not all people in this world were as despicable as he was. The small guild's players did not show any intention to vent their frustration on the kids and merely express their remorse over the opposing guild managing to fool them, timidly adding, "Can we do anything to help save this quest?" "Fuckers." A bunch of good-for-nothings. Monologue Under the Moon ridiculed them and sighed as he replied genially on the surface, "We'll try our best." The men with him were quickly deployed to all the city gates. He also called for the other members of the Black Hand mercenary group to give them a hand. Unfortunately, it was currently the peak hour of the night to play the game, so most of the members were busy with their respective quests. Those who were available to aid them were already with him, so he did not manage to round up more helpers this time around. Instead, the fact that they had not dealt with Thousand Miles Drunk yet caused quite the stir on the mercenary channel. "What's the situation over by the South Gate? Anything to report from the East Gate? How about you guys at the West Gate?" Monologue Under the Moon asked each of them in one go. "Nothing here, negative, and no updates here," were the replies of the teams as they made their way over to those gates. The players with faster movement speed had already left for those directions. The low agility Monologue Under the Moon felt quite unsettled inside as he proceeded to one of those locations at a slower pace. Among his over 20 men, he had made sure to send the ones with faster movement speed over to those 3 routes. But while almost half of the 20-odd men had fast movement speed, no more than 3 or 4 players could be sent out to each gate, so Monologue Under the Moon dared not conclude that the number was sufficient to fight against Thousand Miles Drunk. "Everyone, be careful," Monologue Under the Moon warned. "Relax. Taking him on should be easy with so many of us." Players who had not faced Gufei could not imagine just how formidable he was and were basing their judgment using their knowledge of MMO for the various job classes in Parallel World. In their minds, Thousand Miles Drunk might have high spell damage, but he was still just a mage. Low mana and slow casting speed. Such characters required a proper team to protect them and were hardly a force to be reckoned with in solo fights. "He's really amazing even when in melee, so everyone should be careful." Monologue Under the Moon said this with the slightest twinge of fear in his voice. "Is that so? We really gotta see what's up, then." Everyone's nonchalant attitude made Monologue Under the Moon even more anxious. Unfortunately, he had no way to properly describe just how skilled Gufei was at fighting. He had an ominous premonition of what was about to happen, but he could only give them a few more warnings of, "Be careful. Relax, man." Everyone felt slightly irked by Monologue Under the Moon's constant reminder. "East Gate, we are in position. We don't see anyone. West Gate, we are in position. We don't see anyone. South Gate, we are in position. We don't see anyone." The South Gate should be the furthest from Gufei, since he would have to go around the city to reach it. As for the Black Hand's men, they could go straight to the South Gate from the North Gate by weaving through the city. With the East and West Gates equidistant from the South Gate, the 3 teams managed to get in position in no time. None of them spotted their target along the way, so all they could do was wait. 2 thieves and 2 archers hurriedly made their way over to the West Gate. The 2 thieves immediately entered stealth mode once they got to the West Gate. One archer had chosen to be a sharpshooter and the other had chosen to be a hunter. A hunting trap was placed by the hunter just outside the city gate. It was actually better to set the trap on the road itself, but this hunter's proficiency with the hunting trap was still low, which meant that the hunting trap he set would be noticeable to the naked eyes. Only an idiot would actually step on it if he placed it on the paved road past the city gate. By placing it outside the city gate, even if his hunting trap could not sufficiently be disguised, he could at least do it manually. The hunter dug a small hole just outside the gate and placed the hunting trap inside it. He then carefully sprinkled some dirt over it to make the trap hard to spot, unless someone was carefully searching for it. Just as the hunter finished setting up the trap, the sharpshooter who was watching the road with eagle eye gave him a nudge and yelled to the 2 thieves, "That guy over there seems to be our target." The hunter lifted his head up to look and cursed, "Fuck me. Some individuals were quickly treading along the foot of Yunju city's wall. The man in front was dressed in black mage robe, looking exactly like how the rumors had described 1,000 miles drunk. What made the hunter lost his composure was the fact that he had placed his trap at the center just outside the city gate. Since the target would just make a right turn once he got to the city gate by treading along the foot of the city wall, the chances that the target would step onto his hunting trap were virtually non-existent. The hunter felt discontented that his effort to set up the trap would go to waste, so he tried bargaining with his three companions, lure him over to step on the trap. Gamers always had this desire to show off their skills, especially those that only they had. In the end, the three men simply replied, "We'll see how things go. Shall the thieves engage him first? He happens to be coming straight at you, so you guys can just stab him directly." Gufei was still a distance away, so they took the time to discuss their tactic. It was at this moment that Monologue Under the Moon sent out this message: "Thieves, the target may have an item that counters stealth." Although Gufei had claimed to possess such equipment, Monologue Under the Moon had also witnessed him fail to detect a thief on stealth in their earlier skirmish. Monologue Under the Moon decided to play it safe by believing Gufei's claim instead of expressing his doubt over it. Only at this point did the four players realize that they had yet to report about spotting Gufei to the group, so they hurriedly mentioned this on the mercenary channel. Since Gufei had equipment that countered stealth, the tactic that they had wanted to employ moments ago would no longer work. Guess the trap would be useful, eh? The hunter was invigorated once more. "He's a mage, why would he even run to us?" Gufei was nearly on them, yet they were still arguing on how to deal with him best. "You never know." "Ah, he's about to reach us, quickly get into your positions." Although they learned that Gufei could counter stealth, the two thieves still maintained their stealth. The four men positioned themselves behind the trap as they eyed Gufei covetously. Gufei, who was coming over from afar, pretty much guessed that the suspicious men standing over by the west gate must have been sent after him. He sighed to himself at the enemy's fast reaction. The two students in charge of carrying the brigand leader had been replaced by two thieves from the two warriors before. Yet the speed that they advanced forward was not much faster than the warriors, as they had to carry a body. Making the brigand leader walk on its own would be no good, as it would surely be unable to run at all. As his team got closer, Gufei realized that his ambushers were composed of two archers and two thieves on stealth. With their eyes trained on him and the look on the two archers' faces, Gufei ascertained that they were truly after him. Gufei smiled lightly as he addressed his two students, "Take your time, you two." With that, he broke into a full sprint toward the four enemy players. "Look, he's charging over!" the hunter exclaimed, saying, "Retreat. Let him step onto my hunting trap." The other three heard his request and took 2 steps backward. The two archers arched their bows with nocked arrows and aimed them at Gufei. They were ready to fire at any given moment. The hunter's thoughts and emotions were fluctuating as he impatiently waited for Gufei to step onto his hunting trap. 2 arrows whistled through the air as they were fired off. Instantly, Gufei appeared before the 4 men and the 2 arrows continued to sail behind him. "Blank, I've totally forgotten about that skill of his," the hunter blurted out in exasperation. The 2 thieves hastily flanked Gufei's sides to pincer attack him. Twin incineration. Incinerate. Gufei boomed. His nearness to the 4 men made it somewhat inconvenient to wield his sword normally. This was just a minute problem for someone of Gufei's caliber, though. His sword twirled about as he held it in a reverse grip, placing it obliquely beside his body even as he turned his waist from the right to the left. A flaming dragon followed Gufei's rotation, creating 4 beams of white light behind him as it traveled for 180 degrees. Gufei flourished his sword, returned it inside his dimensional pocket, and waved to the 2 students, "Hurry up. Let's continue onward." He then thought to himself, "This rotating twin incineration is a pretty good move when the opponents are that close to me." Chapter 240, Students need to prioritize studying. The Black Hands mercenary channel burst into activity once more. The 4 players who had been killed by Gufei began arguing and criticizing one another. Finally, they put all the blame on the poor hunter. "You shit, making us wait for him to step onto your hunting trap." "Step, my ass." The hunter felt maligned but could not refute their claim. In retrospect, he had really made a tactical error by making the others wait for Gufei to initiate the attack, which had allowed the latter to effortlessly insta-kill the four of them. While these four men continued to bemoan their fate, the rest of the Black Hand rushed over to the west gate. How would they make it in time, though, when Gufei and his two students promptly sprinted toward the NPC prison upon entering Yunjuan City? With all the winding streets and intersections, the routes Gufei and company could take were as plentiful as the hair off the back of a cow. How would the Black Hand's mercenaries find them when they did not even know where the three's destination was? Although quite a few guild quests were obtained from common locations, such as taverns, many similar quests and missions ended in places like the prison, bounty assignment hall, and so on. The Black Hand's players only numbered to 100, so they dared not split up their force too much upon knowing how strong Gufei was. The only option left for them was to comb through the entire city, yet they soon received bad news from the small guild. The system announced that the quest had ended. Oh! Ultimate Class 3 Guild's players over by the North Gate also received a similar system notification. Receiving the huge experience points from the successfully completed guild quest, quite a few of them leveled up on the spot. White light flashed continuously for a time. Meanwhile, some players of the opposing small guild that were nearby looked on with envious eyes. Besides experience points, the students also gained a few item rewards which were randomly allocated. Most of the items they received were average blue or white tier equipment, yet these students still considered them as rather valuable. Since the equipment ignored job class when it was randomly allocated, these students once more displayed their outstanding unity by exchanging the item rewards with one another according to their job classes. The demi-maid left those players of the small guild salivating once more. Monologue Under the Moon was extremely incensed right now. His face was blackened with anger as he stalked over to the North Gate. Their client's competitive quest failed, so their mercenary mission also failed as a corollary. Since they had picked up this mission through the system, their mercenary group's name over by the rankings in the Hall of Mercenaries had regrettably been given a 1-digit for their failure. Moreover, there was still the indemnity clause that their group had established to worry about. Not only did Monologue Under the Moon have to return the small guild's deposit, he also had to compensate the small guild by shouldering its quest completion fee. The students completed their guild quest and earned experience points and equipment. The small guild might have failed the competitive quest, but it at least earned quite a sum from the Black Hand mercenary group, so the loss was not that big. Overall, the one that got the shortest stick in this whole business was the Black Hand. A few of its members lost a level. The group is obligated to pay the client a tidy sum for failing the mission, and the Black Hand even lost its flawless record. There was a big commotion on the mercenary channel as the group leader, Black Index Finger, expressed his dissatisfaction at how the matter had unfolded. Monologue Under the Moon, who was in charge of overseeing this particular mission, failed to complete it and also caused a substantial loss to the mercenary group. This made it quite difficult to free him from blame. 1,000 miles drunk. Monologue Under the Moon grinded his teeth when Gufei coincidentally bumped into him on his way back to the North Gate with the students. He was about to hand out equipment to his students once more. "Oh, you're here, too." Gufei spotted Monologue Under the Moon and the small guild's players squatting by the North Gate and felt quite surprised. "The quest has ended, so why are they loitering here for? Are these people intending to do something?" Gufei internally prepared himself to fight at any moment. Sir. The students surrounded Gufei upon his return and showed off their newly acquired equipment. "You've all done quite well for yourselves. Follow me, I still have some with me." Gufei brought his students to the warehouse, feeling quite disappointed that Monologue Under the Moon did not make a move in the end. The warehouse contained all of the equipment Gufei had farmed from level 0 to level 40. There were low level and high level, the good and the bad, among the items he had brought out and threw on the ground. The students cried out in jubilation and crowded around the equipment on the ground to snatch what they could. It was like Chinese New Year. One had arrived earlier for these students, causing the other players who had come to the warehouse to gawk at them. Some of them even thought that this was robbery in progress, so they dared not approach the students. "Don't snatch. Line yourselves up first." Gufei yelled for the students to stop their ill-disciplined ways. The students promptly lined themselves up as Gufei tasked a few of them to arrange the items according to job class. Alpha's suggestion to let the ones who did not receive any item rewards from the completed quest pick first was received with approval from everyone. The students came forward one by one and picked out equipment. Although not all of them would end up being satisfied, they were just glad that this was even happening. Some of the students were above level 30, while the others were low level, with 3 being newbies. Gufei felt very gratified to see the pile of equipment before him being put to good use. Teacher is really cool. The students praised their teacher sincerely. As a gesture of appreciation for what Gufei had done for them, Alpha told his fellow classmates, "Take out the mage equipment we've got and let teacher have a look, maybe there's something teacher can use." The mages among the students willingly stepped forward to show Gufei the equipment that the system had rewarded them for the completed quest. Gufei did not even look at them and merely waved his hand, "No need, keep the items for yourselves. Teacher has reached level 40, so these items aren't up to his standard anymore." The students enviously expressed their awe, unaware that the equipment Gufei had was even more polarizing than what they thought. While his sword, robe, and boots were top grade, his other trinkets and gear were still those that Wolo had picked out for him in Y City. Nonetheless, the 3 top grade equipment Gufei had could be blamed for raising his expectation regarding the quality of equipment. Currently, he considered any equipment that was not at the level of his 3 equipment as not worthy of changing into. As the students hailed Gufei with praises, he looked at the time and rained on their parade. "All right, it's getting late. Get everything in order and go offline, you lot. But it's only a bit over 9 p.m. It's still early." The students protested. "A little over 9 p.m. is called early. Have you done your revision for today's class? How about preparation for tomorrow's class? Are you done with your homework, and if so, have you checked it through? Log off, everyone log off. Students like you lot must prioritize their studies," Gufei lectured. After hearing this, the students felt so dejected. Still, none of them dared to rebel against their teacher's intention. Although he was just a PE teacher, he still had the power to make them run 8 laps after class. The student dispiritedly headed back to the designated log-off points. Some tried to sneak off when Gufei was no longer in sight by running off elsewhere, but Gufei's message arrived shortly after. "Why are you not offline yet? Do you wanna run 10 laps tomorrow?" These students could only sigh in lamentation. Had they known that this would happen, they would not have added their teacher as a friend. Right now, even if they somehow managed to sneak off, their lit up names in Gufei's friends list would still indicate that they were very much online. And even if they made their names appear offline, various methods, such as refreshing the friends list, existed to check whether they were online or not. A monk might run away, but the temple remained. The students had no choice but to log off in the end. Gufei watched as the names of all his students stemmed one by one. He refreshed his friends list and checked once more, nodding contentedly after. With how things had progressed, it was perhaps not bad for a teacher like him to play a game with his students, as it could help them maintain a healthy level of gaming. Gufei thought up to this point as he ran toward the bounty assignment hall. His park value was currently over 10 points, so it would be better to erase them all. When he saw that a player had a park value of 5 points, which was way above the others on the wanted players list, Gufei could not help but feel very elated. The guild leader of Corrals, Brave Surge, was the last wanted player he had seen with such high park value. Although it was a duel between mages, the ensuing fight proved to be quite a challenge. Preferring a challenging target, Gufei unhesitatingly picked this bounty mission. He then ran off toward the indicated coordinates, which appeared to be somewhere beyond the walls of the city. This usually meant that the target would be grinding. Not only would Gufei save time searching for his bounty target, he would also perhaps be able to fight with the latter's friends, essentially killing 2 birds with 1 stone. While others doing bounty mission would feel that such a target was a hassle, Gufei only felt elation. He, unlike most people, had the ability to complete such missions. After all, Gufei was instead worried about his target's buddies being too brotherly, as this would certainly cause Gufei's park value to rise instead of drop. Such a situation had happened before. He had once come back from doing bounty mission that was supposed to lower his park value by 1 point but instead increased it by 3 points. That was because his target's companions were loyal enough to willingly throw their lives at Gufei for targeting their friend. Anyway, there was no point in dwelling too much in the past. After readying his equipment and making sure that his HP and mana were full, he headed off toward the coordinates. The set of coordinates changed every minute it refreshed, but the change was very minute, so Gufei got assured even more that his target was currently grinding. He headed south once he left the city, closing in on his target with every step. He did a rough estimation of the location based on the coordinates and realized where his target was currently at. It was an area Gufei had yet to visit. Speaking of which, Gufei would always grind on monsters 20 levels above his, and doing bounty mission often led him to Yunjuan City's neighboring grinding maps. This meant that he frequented places others would not go to unless they were planning to grind on them. For an area to be a foreign territory to Gufei only meant that it was a grinding map beyond level 60. Gufei felt very excited. It had been such a long time since he met an expert. Most of his bounty targets nowadays had been players below level 30. As the level 40 characters seemed to have completely washed their hands off of PvP. He did not know who that expert was, but for that person to actually grind on such high-level monsters, only a handful of experts in Yunjuan City could do so. Gufei continued to make his way toward the coordinates even as his surroundings became more and more unfamiliar. Following the main road and passing through 2 hills, the land before his eyes now looked exceptionally cheery. An embankment lay beside a dense forest and a peaceful village. The system prompt stated that this place was called Suoyun Village. This was the naming convention of Parallel World. Within the region of Yunjuan City, Yunwan was the main motif, so every mountain, forest, village, or river would have this word in it to form the official name. It was clear-cut and simple, nothing that required plenty of thoughts. Gufei would often check information for any grinding maps in search of the next tier of monsters that he could grind on, and he had unintentionally come across such a place before. Suoyun Village was very similar to Yeguang Village of Yi City. It had werewolves as well. But while the werewolves in Yeguang Village were coexisting peacefully with humans and were quest NPCs, the ones in Suoyun Village were the complete opposite as they viciously hunted humans and were treated as grinding monsters. More importantly, this place was a level 70 grinding map.